people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the mother relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Some recent comments from Hall of Fame promoter Bob Arum, who was asked which of Shakur Stevenson, Teofimo Lopez, and Vasyl Lomachenko has the best chance of beating Gervonta Davis, to which he replied,
All three, I think, would beat Davis. I really believe that. I think Shakur beats him, I think Teofimo beats him, and I think Lomachenko beats him.
Now, obviously, because Bob promotes the three aforementioned fighters, he's going to be partial. His evaluation will be a reflection of his stake in the matter. You don't have to actually agree with what Bob says. So it does make you think. Stands the best chance of beating Gervonta Davis of those aforementioned names. I'm already settled on Shakur Stevenson beating him easy, beating him wide on points. Him and Devin, their base styles, that pure boxer base style, it doesn't do a counterpuncher like Gervonta any favors, and we've discussed that to no end in previous videos. Counterpuncher like Gervonta relies on the forward momentum of the other fighter to close the distance so they can get caught out there for doing it. But fighters like Devin and Shakur, they don't close the distance, they manage it, maintaining space between themselves and the other fighter. And if by some chance they can't, they are either going to move or tie you up and force you to reset. But they won't give you anything to counter, which can make for a ho-hum points decision win, a ho-hum victory in a boring fight like the fight we just saw Shakur in with Edwin De Los Santos. Doesn't make for the most crowd-pleasing aesthetic, but it works, and that's why I'm settled on two pure boxers like Shakur and Devin outpointing Gervonta. I'm settled on that. My mind is made up. But what about Vasyl Lomachenko? You know what's funny? For all the years Gervonta spent putting off that fight and avoiding it, I would have actually given him better odds against Lomachenko than I would have against those guys.
Huh?
Because of the styles. Now, don't misunderstand me. That's not saying I think Gervonta would have beaten Vasyl Lomachenko. That's saying I'd give him better odds against Loma than those guys. Why? Because he throws combinations. He strings punches together. And for a counter-puncher like Gervonta, that's essentially what you want. A guy who's going to put punches together so you can nail him in between. Does that mean that Gervonta would beat him? Not necessarily. That just means he stands a better chance. Better chance based on the styles. What's working for Gervonta in a fight with Loma is that Loma does throw combinations, so maybe you can counter him in between the shots. That's what's working for him. What's working against him is that Vasyl Lomachenko has better feet than anybody he's fought so far. Vasyl Lomachenko's base style is a hybrid style that combines the movement and angles of the pure boxer and the pace and work rate of the pressure fighter, hence him being a boxer-puncher. He can box a bit, and he can punch a bit. He's not that boxer-puncher that shifts all his weight onto his back foot, hanging back, waiting to get off a counter shot, like Gervonta, like Teofimo, and like Regis Prograis. He's a hybrid. It's a hybrid-based style, to where what's working for Gervonta is he does throw combinations, so you may yet get the chance to catch him in between, but he plays at the angles, and he's a southpaw like Gervonta is a southpaw. How comfortable is Gervonta boxing another southpaw? It's the question. We've seen Vasyl Lomachenko in there with some southpaws, a southpaw smaller than himself in Guillermo Rigondeaux, and a southpaw that's bigger than he is in Luke Campbell. But I've seldom ever seen Gervonta Davis in there with a southpaw like himself, so I don't know how comfortable he'd be with that. But what is working for him is Vasyl Lomachenko's a combination puncher, so maybe if you play your cards right, you can catch him in between. What's working against him is he throws from unconventional angles. Those fancy feet and those pivots make it possible for him to hit you in the blind spots. Get to the side of you, get a punch off, get in, then open you up for the combinations. And I don't know that Gervonta Davis is all that accustomed to working at that pace. He may tire because he's not used to working at that rate, that pace, and his fights don't usually go the distance. That's saying that even if he has a window of opportunity with Loma that he wouldn't have with Shakur or Devin, that still doesn't mean he wins. And with his quality of competition having been so poor at 130, at 135, and at 140, I feel like he'd be overwhelmed by Vasyl Lomachenko. That, yeah, he's got a shot if he can get in with a shot, but how do we know he doesn't become flustered because Vasyl Lomachenko is throwing so much at him so fast from so many angles, he just doesn't know what to do. This is why I think Floyd Mayweather protected him from Loma and kept him out of that fight. Obviously, Vasyl Lomachenko is not now the fighter that he once was, and him getting older, the gradual decay of time, does make it a more winnable fight for Gervonta, but it's not like it's a fight that he's about to have. It's not like that's a fight that he's actively pursuing. But if I've favored Vasyl Lomachenko to win that fight for all these years, it's because I'm not sure how accustomed Gervonta is to dealing with another southpaw like himself, and he's never fought anyone as dynamic as a Vasyl Lomachenko with as many tools as a Vasyl Lomachenko, that maybe you can catch him in between the shots, maybe, or maybe he overwhelms you with volume from angles you're not accustomed to. Ultimately, Gervonta didn't want to know, and that's why it never happened. So what about Teofimo? What kind of odds would you give Gervonta Davis against Teofimo Lopez? And that is a very intriguing fight. A fascinating fight because Teofimo and Gervonta are more similar than people realize. They're both boxer punchers, they're both counter punchers that don't throw that many punches in a round. They wait for the opportunity to get the counter off, and then they move in. But Teofimo's an orthodox fighter, and Gervonta is a southpaw. But they are both economic counterpunchers that fight out of a shell guard, and who beats who is contingent upon who makes a mistake first. They're both fast, and they're both strong, and they're both at their best, shifting their weight onto their back foot and countering the guy as he's coming in. Giving chase, on the other hand, that's not really their forte. Now, you can definitely argue that Teofimo shouldn't have lost to a guy like George Kambosos. Would Gervonta have lost to a guy like that? Though at the same time, Teofimo does get out of bed for the big fights, the important ones. He does win those. Would Gervonta have fought somebody like Vasyl Lomachenko? We know the answer to that question. Would he have fought the likes of a Josh Taylor at 140 with no weight stipulations? We know the answer to that one, too. You know he wouldn't. He stuck a rehydration clause on Mario Barrios. He stuck a catch weight and a rehydration clause on Ryan Garcia. The one thing you can give Teofimo that Gervonta Davis doesn't have is moxie, his balls. Gervonta ain't got no balls. He wouldn't fight the guys that Teofimo has fought. So maybe that gives Teofimo a slight edge. Their styles are very similar, making a fight between them a question of who's better with that base style? Who's the better boxer puncher? Who's the better counter puncher? Who's the stronger one? Who's the faster one? Who's got more ring IQ? Gervonta Davis's movement is best described as smooth then sudden, whereas Teofimo's movements are more herky-jerky than sudden. Then he explodes, lets his hands go. I feel like the Lopez fight, because their styles are so similar, that would be the closest fight of the aforementioned fights, with the more difficult fight, the most difficult fight being the Shakur Stevenson fight. And this is all based on styles in tandem with their quality of competition. Though ultimately, we may never know how Gervonta would have fared against any of these fighters because he's such a big chicken shit and his handlers are so careful with him. His fans, his supporters, would rather postulate and crown him the victor of any number of hypothetical matchups, going as far as making fan posters of these victories, than see them happen in real time, in real life. So it's really much ado about nothing.
I'll tell you some real shit. I don't think Tank believe in himself. And I'm going to say this, and whoever's listening to it and don't agree, go back and look at the Ryan Garcia fight. Tank has not fought the top-level fighters.
At all.
Yeah, he's getting the big money.
Yeah.
But the great fighters want to fight the top-level guys. Devin's been calling all of them out from day one. What I'm going to say from Tank, this is what I truly believe. When you made Ryan Garcia have a weight clause in the contract To me, that showed me that you wanted an advantage. And I get it, everybody wants an advantage. But a confident fighter that knows it, Devin didn't ask for that from Regis.
Especially when you fought at 140 already and you didn't
You
give
already
him a weight
did.
clause. Mario Barris is at 147, the champion right now.
100%.
You fought him at 140 and didn't do that to him.
He gave him a weight clause. And then when he beat Ryan Garcia, I saw him get more excited after he won than I ever saw him in a fight. And on top of that, he said it's a 50-50 fight. I put all three of those together. The way I saw him act after that win, I'm like, part of him didn't believe he could win this fight.
That excerpt is from the No Bluffing podcast, where former boxer and UFC champion coach and current boxing coach Rashad Holloway doubts Gervonta Davis's resolve because everything has to be just so with him. So lopsided in his favor when you consider that Ryan Garcia has not proven himself to be of the same ilk as a Vasyl Lomachenko, a Devin Haney, a Shakur Stevenson, and in spite of all of this, you still needed to stick a catch weight on him. You still needed to stick a rehydration clause on him just for you to feel comfortable enough to fight with him. I've pointed this out myself many times that I would have picked Gervonta Davis to win that fight without the weight stipulations, but because he actually used them, what does that say about his confidence in himself and his handler's confidence in him? If you want to know what confidence, a confident fighter, actually looks like and how one behaves, consider that Devin Haney signed on for not just one, but 2 fights in Australia because he was that confident that he could beat George Kambosos. And I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, well, that's George Kambosos. That's easy to say after the fact, after Devin's already beat him 2 times, but going into the fight, what George was the Ring Magazine, lineal, and unified champion that had just upset the apple cart for Teofimo Lopez in a fight everybody favored Teofimo to win. And George upset the apple cart for him, whereas Devin didn't shy away from that challenge. He didn't shy away from fighting George, even if it meant he had to do it 2 times, and even if it meant he had to concede home field advantage in both fights. That's how a confident fighter behaves. He didn't stick any weight stipulations on Regis Prograis either in what was his first fight at 140 pounds, whereas Gervonta, you needed weight stipulations for Ryan. Who was the more proven fighter when they fought him? Ryan when Gervonta fought him, or George when Devin fought him? You know the answer. George was a unified champion coming off a big upset win. That's what he was when Devin fought him, whereas Ryan, when Gervonta fought Ryan was little more than a glorified prospect who has a lot of followers and a lot of marquee value, but still, just a prospect. You needed weight stipulations for a fucking prospect. And look, we've been all through that in countless segments, during countless videos. What stands out to me is how people are starting to notice. The more success that Devin has, the more people start to look over at Gervonta. The more they look over at Gervonta and say, well, what's all the hullabaloo about this kid when he hasn't fought a single one of his contemporaries, save a glorified prospect that everyone knew he was going to beat? People are starting to notice. Gervonta's fans, that section of the boxing community, they live in hypotheticals to where he beats every single one of these guys, so they place no importance on him actually doing it in real time, in the real world, going as far as commemorating these quote-unquote victories with fan-made posters. It's ridiculous because what's the explanation? What's the rationale? That he's such a good boxer, he doesn't have to fight the other good boxers? Or that he's such a big name that he doesn't have to fight the other names? That's not the way this works. The same people that spend night and day protecting Gervonta are the exact same people that think Canelo has to fight everyone from 147 up to 175. But not Gervonta. He ain't gotta fight nobody. He's under no pressure to fight anyone at all. And that might go over well with the brokies online and the losers who live vicariously through athletes just because they just so happen to be from the same city as them. But for the real people, the people in the real world that pay real money to see boxing, they're starting to notice. And it's not just the fans, it's the professionals as well. The coaches, the pros, the podcasters, and the pundits.
I would favor Haney after what I saw and what Haney's been doing. Here's the thing. Tank is a pound-for-pound puncher, but he's not beating champions. He's just doing it because of his popularity and because of his punch. But aside from I mean, what champions is he really beating? I mean, 135, 140 is a loaded division. Why isn't he fighting the best? That's the only reason I gotta say Haney, because Haney's taking champion after champion, undisputed, moving up. The credit's with Haney, I will favor him.
The argument is supposed to be that Gervonta Davis is the biggest name anywhere at or around these weights, and some people will go as far as calling him the face of boxing, the biggest name in the sport. But word round the campfire, per boxing insider Rick Glacier, is being told by a very reliable source Gervonta doesn't want to get back in the ring for what's being offered to him by Al Haymon. After making that big windfall with Ryan Garcia, sounds like another fighter that bases their value off of just one fight, when that one fight was an anomaly. No, you're not going to make that kind of money with those Joe Blows on your side of the street. With Rayo Valenzuela, or an Isaac Cruz rematch, or a Frank Martin fight, or an Edwin De Los Santos fight. No, you're not so big a name that you don't need the right dance partner, because even the biggest of the biggest names in the sport still need the right dance partner, whereas you've made a career
Avoiding all the good dance partners, all the good fighters, I should say. You might have got lucky with Ryan. With Ryan, it was the lowest risk for the highest reward. But fights like that, they don't come around every...
Not a bunch of other fights like that lying around, where the guy is beatable enough that you're willing to fight him and you can make boatloads of cash in doing so. Rick Glacier hit the nail on the head. That fight for Gervonta was just an anomaly, and no matter what it did, it doesn't represent his marquee value moving forward, not unless you can conjure up another Ryan Garcia or somebody like him.
The walls are closing in. As these other young fighters at or around these weights continue to do what they need to do to not only make money, but make history, add to their legacies.
Fighting the fights that need to be fought with the fighters there are around to fight. As long as they do this, it makes it that much more obvious that's what Gervonta Davis is not doing and has no intention of doing. So why should he be regarded as one of the best in the sport if both he and his team are so unwilling to prove it? And the excuse is, well, he's making such great money already, he doesn't need these other guys. Well, the boxing fans, they don't need him, and fighters like him.
That he doesn't need Shakur, he doesn't need Devin, he doesn't need Teofimo, he don't need nobody. But I'll ask you, who needs him?
For years now, his supporters have come up with every excuse in the book for him not to fight Vasyl Lomachenko, or Tevin Farmer, or Teofimo Lopez, or George Kambosos, or Devin Haney, or Shakur Stevenson, who's currently campaigning at his weight. This tedious exercise and all these mental gymnastics they go through to protect not only Gervonta from a fight, but protect his image.
As if he's above criticism.
The king of every hypothetical matchup from 130, 135 up to 147. That's right, he wins every single one of those fights in their imagination stations, but they don't push as hard for those fights to happen in real time, in real life. They didn't lose their minds when it was suggested by Stefan Espinoza that he fight a goddamn super bantamweight in Naoya Inoue, but mention Devin Haney or Shakur Stevenson.
They start having chest pains.
You say that he's the face of boxing. Well, it never works out to where the face of boxing has to avoid most of the boxing world. That's not how it works. If he is the face of boxing or one of them, that's that much more responsibility on him to make the big fights.